So what are the value of the wolves to the American people, to the world? It's important to understand that this is the most intact ecosystem that the average person can actually visit. In the mid-latitudes, where you're not going up to northern Canada or wherever, this is the most intact ecosystem. It's the best place to put wolves where people can actually see them. Of the 5 million people or so a year that come here, the vast majority are here to see wolves and bears. Each one of those people spend thousands of dollars on the trip, in lodging, in hotels, in groceries, in eating out. All the economies that surround Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Park are all based on tourism. There's a little bit of ranching, but the economic value is very negligible. So these wolves are several $100 million economic engines for this part of the world every year. Because even if you go 50 miles away, people are still getting gas in Livingston. They're stopping at the grocery store in Livingston. They're staying at the Comfort Inn on the freeway. They're flying into Bozeman. They're flying out of Billings. They're still, even, Billings is 150 miles down the road, and it still reaps a benefit. Bozeman's 100 miles down the road. It reaps a benefit. So even if you were to somehow throw away the transcendental value of the wolves, they're far more significant than all forms of agriculture in this part of the world combined. Far more significant. In Wyoming, number 1 is oil and gas, coal. Number 2, by a long ways, is tourism. And the vast majority of tourism is the Yellowstone ecosystem, Grand Teton, Yellowstone, surrounding areas. After that, way down, is government. But that's Park Service, that's Forest Service, that's BLM. Way down below that is agriculture. And in a state where there are more pronghorn antelope than there are people, and there's very little, you get west or east out into Wyoming, and there's just not very much agriculture, because it's the terrain, the conditions, you see what winter's like. It's so poor, it's just really hard to ranch. And the sheep herding industry pretty much died when the heavy government subsidies went away when the National Wool Act sunsetted in 1984. About 80% of sheep herding in this part of the world just disappeared, because the only way they could make it is on that federal welfare. Without the subsidies up the Paradise Valley, the ranching industry would disappear. How does the death of a wolf outside the park affect our business? It depends on the wolf. Like people, some wolves are more famous than others. When 06 was shot outside the park, that was a wolf that people came to see. She was the Cecil the Lion of wolves. You used to be able to go from Mammoth out to the east end of Lamar Valley before they were delisted and they were being shot, and you could not go without seeing a wolf. You couldn't do it.
Close to the road.
Close to the road. And once 06 was shot and her mate's brother 754 was shot at the same time, that Lamar Canyon pack, which was one of the most famous packs in the park at the time, it pretty much disintegrated, fell apart, and it's never really recovered. So now there's 3 Lamar Canyon wolves out in the east end, out towards Soda Butte, the hitching post. And they used to run everywhere from Slough Creek east. And when 06 died and 754 died, that pack pretty much fell apart. The wolf viewing is not as good. Not as many people came. I don't know that it affects us economically, but just knowing that that creature, that you see her enough, you kind of have a recognition, and you lose that. And then people that were coming to see her, they stopped coming to see her because she wasn't there anymore. And then pretty soon they stopped going to Lamar Valley as much because the wolves weren't there.
If people call and they specifically want us to take them out on wolves, we do have to explain to them that the wolf viewing, if they're seeing these close-up shots of wolves and that's what they're expecting from photography, that's a lucky day, so to speak. Like Jack was saying, before they were delisted, we could just drive down the road and literally sometimes they'd have to be hazed off the road by the rangers because they'd be walking on the road with a bunch of visitors to the park. And now that may happen, but that's not the expectation anymore.
Well, what happened is the wolves that were reintroduced here lived inside the park. They came to see people by and large as a neutral in their environment. We're not a threat, we're not a source of food, we're just neutral. Right. In their heads, it's 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or whatever. But the wolves don't know where the park boundaries are. Well, they do now, but they didn't know where the park boundaries were. So suddenly they're delisted, they're going where they've always gone. And basically, '06 we shot in a guy's front yard by a guy pretty much from the road. And the other thing that happened is the Park Service collared these wolves because they wanted to know where the den sites were and things like that. They collared the alphas. Well, they emitted an HF signal that was easily trackable by anybody with the little $30 outdoor antenna. And people were tracking her. It's illegal, but we saw ranchers up past Cook City. We would see them in the park with those antennas in the back seat of their vehicle. How did the deaths of '06 and 754 affect the pack structure? And the first thing to say is watching the wolf pack is kind of like watching Peyton Place. It's always in turmoil. There's always drama, just like with people. I think a lot when we're watching wolves, we're watching ourselves. And with all the drama and all the frailties. And '06 was one of the most iconic wolves in the history of the reintroduction. 750, and her mate was 755M. 754, who was shot along with '06, was 755's brother. So when those two died, the Lamar Canyon pack it still exists, but there's only 3 wolves in it. And 755 tried to get the pack back together, but within fairly short order, he was related to every other wolf. So he had to leave. And he actually went over to the Hayden Valley and started what is now the Wapiti Lake Pack. If '06 doesn't die, 755 is still probably roaming the Lamar Canyon with '06. But wolves have really short lifespans, 4 or 5 years, so maybe something else would have happened. You look at, so 755 went over and founded the Wapiti Lake Pack that we're looking at now because he lost his pack, and the catalyst for that event was him losing his mate. And ultimately, Molly's wolves came over and kicked 755 out of the second pack he founded. And when those Molly's wolves went over to the northern range, and they caused a lot of destruction to other packs, ultimately the Blacktail Butte pack dispersed because of the damage inflicted upon them by the Mollies. 758, who was the alpha there, and was actually the last wolf born into the Druid pack. And the Druid pack was really famous in the early days, got up to about 40 strong. Wow. Okay, named after Druid Peak. He was the last Druid. And when that happened, he ended up not getting involved in another pack and roaming outside the park to the north and was shot. Was taken in one of these quote unquote hunts. But he was collared. So that means he was easily tracked. Or game camp, all these things that are illegal and unethical. So if '06 stays alive, Lamar Canyon pack stays strong, the Mollies maybe don't come over. The Mollies don't come over, they don't do all this other stuff, cause all this other damage in the packs on the northern range. And maybe 750, maybe you can still go by the Blacktail ponds and see the Blacktail Butte pack. So it's just like these little ripples. You know, it's hard to say for sure, but on the other hand, we wouldn't be looking at a Wapiti Lake pack. right? Which is probably one of the most entertaining, energetic packs we've seen since the shooting started. But we can say, I can say for sure, that the wolves got a lot more skittish on the northern range after they started getting shot at. And it's really been last year, maybe this year, in my opinion, that the wolf watching is starting to return to a semblance of what it was before that happened. And it's also interesting, the wolf population was already in decline by the time they were delisted. So we were already seeing those intersecting sine waves. Okay, the elk population bottomed out, the wolf population followed it. The wolf population was suffering badly from sarcoptic mange, which was actually introduced by the state of Montana in 1905. It was a legislative act. They directed the state veterinarian to capture wolves and coyotes, infect them with sarcoptic mange, which is scabies, and then release them back into the wild. They wanted to kill them. It was biological warfare. Wow. So when you start talking about the ranching interests, okay, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about people who think that was a good thing today, what was done 100 years ago. They think biological warfare was okay. That's the people you're going to go talk to up in the valley. In their head, the wolf is the boogeyman. I mean, there's been a very deliberate effort on the part of European settlers to exterminate the wolf in North America after they largely exterminated the wolf in Europe. And the wolf is blamed for all manner of ills. In 2014, for example, I think it was about 144 cows were taken by wolves in all the state of Montana. Over 20,000 died from bad weather. But that's not what they want to talk about. They want to talk about the 144. The elk are so overpopulated in Rocky Mountain National Park and Estes Park that they are tame animals looking for handouts on the streets where we used to live. The Park Service, because of political opposition, primarily from the ranching industry, has actually been opposed to bringing wolves back into Colorado, but they're paying professional quote-unquote hunters to go out and shoot elk in the park to keep the population down, which is what used to happen in Yellowstone. And what wolves would maybe hurt the Yellowstone and Grand Teton economies a little bit, because there's 6 million people on the Front Range now that maybe if they thought they could go to Rocky Mountain National Park and see wolves, might not come up here.
That's a good point.
Okay. But there are already wolves back in Colorado. They've been videoed up by Ted's place on 287. We've personally heard them up by Hans Peak, north of Steamboat Springs. And as you all have heard, the difference between a coyote and a wolf howl is absolutely unmistakable. And we've heard wolves up by Hans Peak, so they're already there. But if anything, the ranching lobby in Colorado is more powerful than here. It's as economically insignificant, but they've got pretty much the Division of Wildlife in their pocket doing their bidding, and they're not going to let wolves back. So, hey guys, this is really more of a political issue than an environmental issue. The science is pretty clear. It really is. Cattle and sheep are the invasive species. Modern day cows are all descended from the aurochs, which was a European type of buffalo that's been extinct now for about 500 years. Sheep they have no business being in the wild. And these industries that are on marginal ranching land with decreasing economic clout actually have increasing political clout. And that's because they were the first folks in here. And they're well entrenched at all levels of government. They're very well organized. They're very well funded. And they go nuclear option on any candidates that dare oppose them right away. And they play their politics with a viciousness that is kind of common today, but is not what you're used to seeing. And they've been very successful. Colorado's state government is dominated by Democrats, very liberal Democrats, and there's not even hint of a conversation about wolves really coming back. Montana's got a Democratic government. Democratic Senator John Tester wrote the delisting language in 2012. So it's kind of bipartisan. You get inside the Beltway, and the wildlife has no friends. And they would rather sit out here and let the bison be shot from the road, as you all have seen the aftermath. Let the elk get so plentiful and the population density get so high that chronic wasting disease, which is a wild ungulate version of mad cow, is a serious problem in Wyoming. It's a serious problem in northern Colorado. There's deer up here in the Paradise Valley that have been hit by cars that have tested positive for chronic wasting disease. It's a serious potential problem on the elk refuge, where 9,000 elk are hand-fed 4 months a year. And that gets loose there, and you'll be reading about how there's no more elk in Wyoming. But they would rather do that to keep the ranchers happy. You let the wolves come back, there's no more overpopulation problem. It'll take a few years. The elk population will drop. Eventually the wolves will decline, the elk will come back. The elk population now is almost double what it was in Yellowstone 8 years ago or so. They're wanting to extend the hunting season because they can't shoot enough of them. And as you drove down the Paradise Valley, what'd you see, 3,000 just hanging out by the road in some rancher's field? That's not natural behavior. And the question is, how far back in time do you want to roll the clock? Do you want to go back to 1900? Do you want to go back to 1870? Do you want to go back to 1840? Right? If you're from the east, do you have a deer overpopulation problem?
Yeah.
You want to start putting wolves in Orchard Park? Well, I mean, it's a serious question.
Yeah.
Because out west, we hear a lot about how we're supposed to live and how we're supposed to respect the environment. And we get that a lot from Europeans. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Why are you here? See the wildlife? Where's yours? I mean, across the country, wolves are plentiful. Right? If you read Rick McIntyre's book, War on the Wolves, there's written accounts by the mid 17th century, 1650s, about how they're starting to exterminate the wolves in Massachusetts and Connecticut and Rhode Island, the original colonies. And they've been pushed to this little island here as their last stand. I mean, these are all plains animals. The bison, the elk, the wolves, the grizzly bears, they're all plains animals. This is just a last remnant population because nobody could live here. Did you know Yellowstone was once open for homesteading? Nobody wanted to live here. Right? Up here on the plateau in the high country, nobody wanted to live here. It wasn't made a national park for wildlife. It was made a national park because people thought the geothermals were cool. And it became, because of that, it's the only reason there's still bison in this country, that the bison aren't extinct. Is because there were 100 hanging out in the interior of the park that nobody could get to with the rifle soon enough.
I think that when people come out with us to do photographic safari or photographic workshop, once they leave, they have a better understanding of the environment and the wildlife and the kind of the love that we have for it. We imprint on people that we meet, whether it's people we meet not even on a safari or people that we meet that have paid to come out with us. We provide education as far as both the parks and Grand Teton and Yellowstone and the wildlife. A lot of times we've actually had people that have come out with us and said, well, we want to photograph or see all wildlife, but we don't want to see wolves. That's the only wildlife species that we've ever had anybody say that they don't want to see. And somebody who was an avid hunter from Austin, Texas, and they said that they didn't want to see wolves. And by the time we were done, we were at least having a little bit of a conversation with them about them, getting our perspective out. Whether we changed his mind, I don't know, but that's all you can do is have the discussion about it. I know most people that come out with us, we are kind of a smaller tour group. So for the most part, we're going to have people that their first love is photography, their second love is wildlife, or vice versa. And so we usually get to instill a lot of times we have people that have come out with us that are wedding photographers or portrait photographers that have never even photographed wildlife, so then they have to get instruction from Jack and different lenses and everything like that. And I think that Jack has converted some people from weddings. I think he converted somebody today from being a wedding photographer to a wildlife photographer, because you can't, I don't think you can meet either one of us and not get excited about the wildlife. So, ecotourism, a lot of the guide companies, not Jack and I, or even the bigger safari companies in both Yellowstone and Grand Teton, a lot of them require biology majors or people that are doing internships. A lot of people come for their master's degree for a program through a university and end up being a safari guide, and they through a CUA program that both Grand Teton and Yellowstone have, that's part of our permit, is that we have to positively influence the park's mandate of providing education about the wildlife, education about the environment, education. Part of our programs for all of CUAs is you have to tell them how you're conserving, how you're helping conservation, as far as down as, are you using reusable water bottles? Are you, what kind of meals are you providing? They actually have in Grand Teton, we know specifically, they'll have people that run the program right along on some of the safaris incognito and just make sure that you're providing the park's message. And a lot of people will leave or will come out away from one of our safaris and be like, I had no idea about that, because Jack here, as you've heard, he has information not only about Grand Teton and Yellowstone, but definitely regionally, nationwide, and throughout. So you can have conversations from things about solar panels and everything. So it becomes comes back into the Grand Teton Yellowstone ecosystem, but it broadens out quite a bit.
Do I think that the wolf could be an ambassador for conservation of other species? Absolutely. It's a keystone species. It's, along with the grizzly bear, the two apex predators in North America that made it out of the last ice age. There are the trophic cascade from the wolves coming back into Yellowstone is well documented. 25 years ago, you went into the Lamar Valley and the elk had ground it down to desert. There were no willows. There were no moose, because moose need willows. The banks of the river were eroding because there was nothing to hold them in place, because the overpopulation of elk was so intense that it was destroying the park. And so if people just look at those facts, I think, then it's easy to see actually ecology. Okay, we're not talking about the scatological samples of X, Y, or Z. We're actually looking at the entire system, how the entire system functions, right? And in that case, the wolf is clearly the ambassador. It's had, just the return has had such a tremendous impact, positive impact on the park and the wildlife. If you were out there in Lamar Valley and you saw the Barrow's golden eyes, right? You never used to see them on Lamar River, ever. You see the river otters are back. The moose are back in confluence.
That's the first time I've ever seen moose there.
That's the first time I've seen moose back there since I was a child.
Oh.
And that's all due to the wolves and the wolves returning. You know, wolves eat elk. That's what they prefer. And occasionally they will eat cattle if their food is not there. And outside of that, though, so there's negatives. I mean, it's not just it's this way and that's the only way, and the wolves are perfect in that regard. They've got to eat like all living things. But they're absolutely the ambassadors. I mean, how many people do you see driving around the road with river otters on their car? Right? Or with license plate, you see the wolf 0 whatever. That's their call sign when they come up here and they're part of that wolfing community. Okay, they strike that chord, that deep chord in us that other animals do not, with the exception maybe of the grizzly bear. What I like about the wolves the most is their behavior is so intelligent. if you were out there watching them play, I mean, you were watching advanced mammals. You were watching creatures where something's going on in their head. And we get to see a window to the way the world used to be. In this one place, this less than 1% of the land in the country, we can come back and see what our ancestors saw. And when you hear them howl, there's just something primordial about that, right? And the more urban we get, and the less connected to the natural world we get. John Muir was really the first guy who talked about, I need to go back to my roots, I need to go back to nature. And that's a voice that's slowly and in fits and starts been gaining steam over the last 140, 150 years. And you can come do that here and listening to the wolves. Elk you can see anywhere. I mean, they're literally everywhere, right? Deer, right? You know about deer in your neighborhoods. Otters are everywhere. Not that I don't like watching otters, they're great. But wolves, bears, you have to come here.
And for me, it's the same, except for I kind of look at it a little bit differently. The approach is, we live here. We do kind of get spoiled. I mean, we get excited to see them on the ridge. We get excited to see them close up. But for me, one thing that I find really enjoyable and something that gives me, I don't know, intrinsic satisfaction is getting other people to see them. An example would be we were in the Hayden Valley, and this same pack of wolves that's up here right now, the Wapiti Lake Pack, was out, and there was an 8-year-old little girl, and she was there with her family, and she said it was her birthday trip, and she couldn't see the wolves through binoculars. So we showed up, and we put a scope up. These were people we didn't know at all. We put the scope up. She looked through the scope. She couldn't see the wolves. She's like, I still don't see them. They're probably, a mile and a half out?
A mile anywhere.
And so I put it on the screen of my phone because, everybody knows how to watch a TV. So I put it on there, and literally we were running video, and you can hear this 8-year-old little girl going, oh my God, I never thought I'd get to see wolves. This is the best birthday present ever. And she's literally crying. And I'm like, you know what? That is amazing. And, I get to see them all the time, but to have people that maybe this is their once-in-a-lifetime trip. A lot of times we get people that they say that this is their bucket list trip, and they're in their 70s or 80s, and they've never been to Yellowstone and Grand Teton, and, they want to see wolves, they want to see bears, they want to see those marquee species. We don't get a lot of people that call and say, we want to see a mule deer. Well, they're cool. There's not a lot of people that come for them. People come to this area, people spend money, people work hard to spend that money, or to save that money to come on a trip, and it's bears and wolves. And these are the only places, unless you want to go to Alaska, where you can see bears and wolves.
All living things must eat. We're not vegetarians by evolution. We're opportunistic omnivores, which means that meat's part of our diet. At some point in our history, we decided that it was easier to domesticate the wild animals and then have them to go pick the one that we wanted to eat rather than go running around in the woods and do that. That's a decision that as a species we made. So that said, without the predators, the population is all out of balance, it's out of whack. Yellowstone lives within some lines on a map. It doesn't live within a contiguous ecosystem. The issue that we see with the elk and the bison is they have no winter range. They want to go out to Paradise Valley up to Livingston so they have somewhere where they can survive in the wintertime. So let's just say hypothetically that magically happened. You came back in 15 years and the Paradise Valley be overpopulated with bison and elk, and they'd be wanting to push north of 90. So the question I said at the beginning of this, how far do you want to roll the clock back? And who do you want to tell that they've got to leave? Right, during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, there was serious talk about depopulating a good portion of the Great Plains forcibly if necessary. And FDR stopped Harold Ickes from doing that, who incidentally was instrumental in the national park system we have today. So I guess there's no free lunch there. But in terms of trophy hunting, modern weapons, modern ballistics, modern optics. It's not hunting. You know, Wyoming, the one thing that I think Wyoming does accurately is they call everything a population reduction. Now, what do you do? I mean, that's a really serious question for you young people that are getting the next generation coming up. There's a population in this country is expected to double. You're going to have to wrestle with that question. How far back do you want to turn the clock? I mean, I get lectured by people from Europe all the time, and I'm like, you can't talk to me. You have no more wildlife left. You killed it all. So don't come out here and tell me what to do. Right. We have the same thing people from big eastern cities. And it's a really, I think that's the fundamental question, is what sacrifices do we want to make? And that's kind of off the topic, but to get back to trophy hunting, it's not hunting. And I say this as a military veteran, I say this to these people all the time. If you really want to hunt, join the military. You'll get good training, you'll get good weapons, you'll get to go all over the world, you'll get a license to do stuff that you go to prison for in this country. There's only one catch. What you're hunting is hunting you back, and they know what they're doing. That's real challenge. There's no challenge to drive out here and shoot something at point blank range. That's not sport. By definition, it's not sport, because there's no chance you're going to lose. So it's not sport. There's no challenge. And you ask one of these people that they're a trophy hunter, so what is it about you that you doubt? Do you doubt your tracking ability? No, I know I can track it. So you doubt your trigger control at the moment. Well, no, I know I can do that. So then what's the challenge? There is no challenge. And I think there's something pretty deeply wrong with people that think it's sport. To go out here with these animals that are semi-tame at best. The elk are hand-fed 4 months a year on the refuge in Wyoming. And that started because when the town of Jackson grew up, it blocked the elk's migration route. They used to go into southwestern Wyoming. So the elk were stopping there north of the town of Jackson and starving to death. Wow. And so they had to keep the population of elk to go shoot the following fall up, so they hand feed them. We're out here because this is what we love to do. If we won Powerball, we'd probably be in a newer car. You know, we wouldn't be in something with 100,000 miles on it, but we'd be doing the same thing. And we'd be still trying to engage as many people as we could and try and share that. So you're going to take home, you're going to go back, and you're going to bring this experience home with you. And you're going to talk to your friends about it. And if you talk to your friends about it, like, yeah, I went out there, it was cold, we saw the wolves, and oh my God, and we got video, and we could hear them howl. Okay, well, that's going to translate. Yeah. And so our hope, our love is that when you start to see the parks are under attack, that even though you're far removed, maybe it'll mean a little bit more to you.